Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number 7 team in my 2024 NFL Deep Dive series. It's the Cleveland Browns. Do that YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe, all that crap. One of the themes of this video is going to be a couple of things. It's going to be number 1, the color red. The amount of guys on the PUP list, the amount of guys with injury questions on this team, it's very significant. And it's not even just guys who are sort of underneath. It's very significant players that are going to be key contributors. We'll start Nick Chubb, obviously, with that brutal knee injury that he suffered last year. He's going to go on 12 months off by the time the season starts, by the time week 1 happens. Just about, give or take. Give or take a week. 1 week. Just short. 51 weeks. 51 weeks. How he's recovered. He's listed as a starter right now, but on the physically unable to perform list. 2 other guys on the PUP. Jedrick Wills, Jack Conklin, your 2 starting tackles. Now, they do have some good depth there in DeJuan Jones. We'll get to that. But that's still a concern. You don't want to lose both those guys either. It does drastically drive down the overall grade of the offensive line, which will in turn hurt what they got going on at the quarterback position, in particular with the inconsistent massage enthusiast Deshaun Watson. We'll get to his grades as well. On the defensive side of the ball, they're putting out one of the best defenses in the entire league that does have some small character issues, I would say, with 1 or 2 guys, in particular on the defensive line. We will get to that. I don't understand what it is with Cleveland Browns players and refusing to keep their hands to themselves when it comes to females, but we'll get to the defensive version of Deshaun Watson kind of at some point as well. Huge disappointment there because these are good players, theoretically, that should be tremendous contributors and way less of a distraction what they actually are. Now, what's not a distraction is how great that coaching staff is. Coaching staff is so good. We'll get to that. A coaching staff that I was not high on last year, that Browns fans let me have it, and boy was I wrong, and boy do I own it, and we're going to get to that. How that coaching staff interacts with some of the roster bubble veteran types that they have, particularly Amari Cooper and Denzel Ward, who, if you believe the rumor mill, are both sort of on their last legs with this team. It seems, you know, they just went out and got Jerry Jeudy, which is very redundant to Amari Cooper. We'll get to that. And they've invested a lot of assets in the cornerback room in particular over the last couple of years. That sort of leads me to believe that maybe Denzel Ward is also out with Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson there. Whoa. Ignore that. I'm leaving it in, though. What was that? I need more water. Everyone says I should drink more water. I'm going to. But before I do any of that, let's go to talk about this coaching staff that I couldn't have been more wrong about last year, that I hope that now I'm not completely wrong about going the opposite way. So overall, this is my 6th ranked coaching staff. I said it last year and I said it throughout the season. I'm like, if the Browns do something big, Kevin Stefanski will actually raise up in my rankings. I think he was like not even top 20 for me last year. And if he was barely. And I see people still ranking him that way. And I understand why, but what he did last year with Joe Flacco, with all those injuries, with the player development he got specifically on the offensive side of the ball, I'm like, Browns fans, your coach needs to be a top 5 head coach at that point. That was the resume that he needed, especially in this town with this team. It was just a tremendous performance by Stefanski, his best. You know, he was coach of the year, well deserved. You know, he really, I think, established himself as that. You know, you hear the term like cheat code coach and that type of terminology. To be able to revive the career of a 39-year-old quarterback the way that he did, without the team's best player, Nick Chubb, for 16 games out of the season, makes the playoffs. It's just what else can you say? Now, big mistake was hiring Ken Dorsey as his offensive coordinator. Ken Dorsey just absolutely tanked in Buffalo last year. Maybe he needed a change of pace, maybe. But he helped get Josh Allen to a certain level, working with Brian Dable, and it seems like it ran its course almost. Like, he got Josh Allen to the level Josh Allen was going to get to anyway, and couldn't elevate that offense in general to the next level. Now, is that because he was working with a more defensive-minded head coach in Sean McDermott? Perhaps. That could be it. That could very well be the reason why. And now with Kevin Stefanski, maybe Stefanski's going to give him a different perspective on offense. He's going to be, this allows Stefanski to maybe step back a little bit because Dorsey does have experience. He does have a history of some success. But to put in that style of offense, mixing it in with Ken Dorsey, that could yield some pretty good results. Now, there is the risk always when you have an offensive-minded head coach and you bring in an offensive coordinator who's used to running things, that you could have a bit of like an ego clash perhaps. Some issues in philosophy. Ken Dorsey relinquishing control that he used to have could become an issue, and it could become, a feud of sorts. That does happen, and it happens behind the scenes, and sometimes doesn't necessarily become public until years later, but then you can look back at some of the issues that a team had throughout that season. You can sort of see, okay, that's where that came from, is from those issues. They got Bill Musgrave as the senior offensive assistant. I really like that hire. And then they got Deuce Staley as the running backs coach. Deuce Staley had a pretty good run for a while there. Things got kind of out of hand in Carolina for that little bit. In that alleged Avengers Unite coaching staff that I was told was so fantastic in 2023, and he lasted 11 games. So yeah, he was a big part of one of the most bust coaching staffs. So to come in here and as I think it's a good role for him to have. He's getting a great room to work with, and they're going to have to really continue to develop things well behind Nick Chubb, because as we'll get to, there's huge question marks around his health. Moving on to the defensive side, now you got Jim Schwartz, who is my best ranked defensive coordinator. I think what he did last year was just epically great work. And the huge advantage, I heard this was said, and it's really true, there is no risk of them losing him. No one is going to be hiring Jim Schwartz to be a head coach, no matter how great he does here. He's had opportunities to be a head coach. His age doesn't really dictate him getting that chance. If they're going to go with a defensive-minded head coach, they're going to go with a youth movement. They're going to go with somebody like Jonathan Gannon. They're going to go with somebody like D'Amico Ryans. They're not going to go with Jim Schwartz. So Cleveland has created a chance to have real continuity here between Kevin Stefanski and Jim Schwartz, where now the offense and the defense is going to be the same every year. They're going to be able to properly scout players. They're going to be able to properly build a roster on both sides of the ball. They're going to be able to properly build depth, get in role players, develop these role players, put people in the system through the practice squad and whatnot, to make sure they always have the best players available. And that strategy is only going to help improve an already really great defense. It's going to help with the coaching staff and building the position coaches here on the defense side of the ball, which, no one in particular jumps out as this big name. I recognize Zach Dunn, the defensive assistant. I recognize Jordan Thomas, the assistant defensive line coach. But other than that, it's going to give people an opportunity to grow under Jim Schwartz in so many different ways, and there's nobody better. At least there was nobody better last year either to do that with. Does Myles Garrett take an extra step up with Jim Schwartz now establishing himself, and they bring in more players, they get all that depth? Myles Garrett already won Defensive Player of the Year. He really cemented himself as probably the best defensive end in the league under the Jim Schwartz system. Now, does Jim Schwartz turn around and somehow make him better? What could he put in? How does he allow Myles Garrett to repeat that performance? I think is going to be the real task for Jim Schwartz moving forward here. Is not necessarily is taking all these players that are really great already on his roster and allowing them to sustain or even somehow elevate themselves. There's also the situation with the cornerback room where there is some really good talent there. You're going to be looking to want to elevate people because Denzel Ward, who we'll get to, may not necessarily financially be sustainable on this team. So you got Greg Newsome, you got Martin Emerson, you got a couple other guys there behind the scenes that Jim Schwartz is going to have a chance to work with here. How does he divvy up those responsibilities throughout the season to get the reps for these guys who need to develop? So then that way financially, you may be able to move on from a veteran player the way, teams always love to do. Get some type of asset to then build upon for the future, and maybe take a small step back, knowing that you're going to take a giant leap forward perhaps because of the way that you handled this season and how you position guys in that secondary in particular. But overall, this is the 6th ranked coaching staff. It is a tremendous staff. I think that at the end of the day, the only question mark is how does a offensive head coach relinquish enough control to a guy who's used to having all that control in Ken Dorsey, and how does that affect the team's performance? How does that affect game-to-game planning? How does that affect play calling during a game? That's something that Stefanski and Dorsey are going to have to work out. Hopefully, obviously they've been doing that work here in training camp and in the preseason. How they can continue to do that will be a real dictation of how well the offense in particular is going to do, which will have to complement this defense that is going to be giving out top 5 performances almost every week. So going on to the quarterback here, Deshaun Watson is my 17th ranked quarterback. I thought I was low on him again until I saw other people being even lower. But the concerns have seemed to be all the same, is that Deshaun Watson hasn't gotten back to that level that we saw him in his last year playing in Houston. He's only played like 12, 13, 14 games, I think, for Cleveland since he's gotten there with that giant contract. He just hasn't looked consistently good. He's had those moments where you go, there's Deshaun Watson, the one that they traded for. That's the one that makes that trade worth it. That's the one that makes that contract worth it. That's that guy. That's what's in there. It's only been like 1, 2, maybe 3 times in those 12 games. The other times he's been incredibly inconsistent, making really poor decisions, not being accurate downfield with the ball, not making the adjustments at the line, pre-snap adjustments that he was making under Bill O'Brien, not situationally acting the way that he was in Houston. Just boneheaded plays and not processing the defense the way that you would hope. And he has many times in games with the Browns looked like one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league. Very few times has he looked like one of the best, which is a complete departure from basically day one in Houston. Day one in Houston, he came in as a rookie. He was quick. He was athletic. He was processing the defense as well. He was making good decisions. He was getting pre-snap reads perfect. He was making adjustments and then killing and making more adjustments. Like, he was so locked in. And it makes you wonder, people talk about Bill O'Brien not being a great head coach, and that's probably true. But just solely as an offensive guru, solely as somebody who can design an offense strategy, coach up a quarterback, get him ready for each and every single week, maybe that is the separation here. You know, it could be the fact that Deshaun Watson just hasn't gotten enough live reps. You know, I press that in so many of these videos in this series is about live reps. Get the reps, get the reps. Some guys just need the reps. Watson was off for a year and hasn't really been able to settle in either. In a consistent role, in a, you know, hasn't sustained a full season, injuries and all that. Maybe what he just needs is a full season. I think that could be a real possibility too. We saw it last year with Russell Wilson, where he was coming off of a bad season, confidence was probably low, started slow, but then just because he kept getting the reps, he, by the end of the year, actually didn't look all that bad. He actually looked like a middle-of-the-pack quarterback in the NFL. Maybe that's what's missing here for Deshaun Watson. Maybe it's just getting back into the rhythm of being a professional quarterback every single week. Not worrying about, you know, legal issues, which I'm not going to play judge, jury, and executioner in this video. You can come to your own conclusions. Maybe it's trusting that he's healthy enough to play the style that made him arguably a top 5 quarterback in the league during his time in Houston. Maybe that's all he needs. And this year, you know, with that contract that he has, if it doesn't come this year, there's going to be a situation where this organization in the offseason is probably going to be looking at creating a long-term replacement and figuring out how much can they actually eat in this contract. You know, maybe they bring in a rookie quarterback and they just deal with the fact that Deshaun Watson's got this big contract and they create a quarterback competition. I think that he needs to show what made that trade worth it to them. He's in no real threat of losing his job this season, even though they brought in Jameis Winston, who's got starters experience. He hasn't been all that great in his career. Sort of, frankly, the same issues that Deshaun Watson has been showing since his time in Cleveland. So it's just a worse version of Deshaun Watson. So that's a questionable decision, but it also, because the skill sets can be comparable to a degree, it does create some continuity in the event that Deshaun Watson does go down, or that he, you know, for whatever reason. Tyler Huntley's sort of like a complete departure. So if they ever just want to flick a switch and say, screw it, we're going to become a read option Baltimore Ravens style offense, then Tyler Huntley ends up making the team and Tyler Huntley ends up on the field, and it's a complete change of pace. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, he was the last year's preseason darling, where people were like, oh, they might have found a stud, and just, yeah, everyone calm down, you know. Wow, he looked great against third stringers. Good job. But overall, this is going to live and die by Deshaun Watson here, especially because of the concerns of the running back room and the health of the running back room, and is Nick Chubb going to be able to come back as the same player that he used to be? So as of right now, you look at the depth chart, Nick Chubb is listed as the starter, just currently on the physically unable to perform list, the PUP list. That tells me that at some point very early in the season, they're planning on him being around. And I still haven't been read, because if he's healthy, I anticipate this running back room being tied for 6th in the entire league, with him actually still being able to perform in a top 5, top 6, top 7 level. At least in the top 10 running backs. They did a great job of getting guys behind him, though, in the event that he's not the same player, with Donta Foreman, maintaining Jerome Ford, who played great in Chubb's replacement last year. So you create that combination of backs. They also brought in Nyheim Hines, who's also on the PUP list, who would fill in as that like true running back by committee that would exist in the event Nick Chubb can't go. I think it was a really smart decision to do that. You know, there's just a lot of faith that I have in Nick Chubb, who was, I'd say, inarguably a top 2 running back going into that injury, that if he loses 5 or 6 ranking spots from the injury, I think that's reasonable. I don't expect him to fall off a cliff. I think we're in a world where he's also been off since week 2 of last year, so that's a lot of recovery time, even though that was brutal and disgusting to see. It does create a lot of space. Like, it's almost like 12 months, a full year's worth of surgery, rehab, and getting yourself back on track, which is more than you see from a lot of other guys. Usually they get back on the field earlier than that, and it takes them a little bit to get back up to speed. Now, they've created a running back room where Nick Chubb may not need to be back week 1. He may not need to be back week 2. Maybe he misses the first 3 weeks of the season, and they got this running back by committee going on here, specifically with Foreman and Ford. Maybe Hines isn't ready, or Hines ends up getting put on IR or something. But they still have Foreman, they still have Jerome Ford, where they can, for 2-3 weeks out of the season early, 4 at the worst, I think they can definitely create an offensive scheme for those couple of weeks where they have a really effective running game, and then Nick Chubb can come back at 100% after 13 months off, more than just 12. He would also be tied for 18th in terms of being a receiving back. Now, this is where they don't really have a whole lot going on there. People talk about Nyheim Hines. I think Nyheim Hines has regressed in a lot of senses in his abilities that made him special. I think he's sort of dropped down to that, he's a good back to be a backup receiving back. Jerome Ford actually played quite well as one last year in his opportunities. Donta Foreman did the same. So between those 3 guys, I think you can find a good third down receiving back for, again, a couple of weeks in replacement of Nick Chubb. Now, even when you bring Nick Chubb back, you're probably not going to want to run him into the ground, which is where I think in these situations here, these early down situations, where you have a Donta Foreman who is a really great backup. He could have been a starter in many ways for a couple of teams out there this year. Jerome Ford showed that he can carry the load to a large degree. Now, this to me is where you would take Nick Chubb off the field. You wouldn't want to grind him. Maybe you want to put him in these situations here as a receiving back. Maybe you want to get him out in space. Maybe you want to get him out of those crowds where, you could end up with more injuries. Maybe, or even if it's not that, maybe it's putting him out there where he's got maybe a little bit more confidence. Maybe put him out there, put him in space, let him make some moves and follow some blocks, and then step out of bounds and not get contact. And use that to build his confidence up. Not do what the Giants did with Saquon Barkley, which is just start turning around, handing the ball off 25 times a game between the tackles, and just have him get killed. And then have no opportunity to build back up that confidence, have no opportunity to get back on track. They have a very unique opportunity here to ease one of the best running backs in the league back into playing, back into feeling confident, back into feeling healthy. And that in the long run will completely elevate this entire offense to a level that they really need to get to, because when your defense is as good as theirs, that we'll get to eventually, you need to have the ability to do shorten games. And if you can get this running back room going, if you can shorten games, the defense is going to give you so many opportunities to win games. You're not going to have to score a lot of points to win a lot of games. So you got to be efficient, got to be smart, got to stay ahead of schedule, and you have to keep the clock ticking. And you do that with a great running game. And I really like the running back room. It's just a matter of how healthy Nick Chubb can get, how much he can get to max out his ability there, max out his battery, so to speak. When you use a phone for too long, sometimes it'll never get back to that 100% loading screen. Maybe you're only going to be able to get it to charge to that 90%. How quickly can you get Nick Chubb to that full charge, even if it's not 100% of what you're used to from Nick Chubb? Moving on to the weapons now, and this is the wide receiver room, and they're 24th for me. Let's start with Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy. Talk about redundant. I hated this move. I hated it. I thought that when Jerry Jeudy came into the league, he was compared to Amari Cooper. That was his player comp. They're basically the exact same player. So I don't understand how you're going to put them both on the field at the same time. I don't understand how they're both going to see success while existing together. It makes no sense to me. And the fact that they paid Jeudy, I don't know. Maybe the plan is to trade Amari Cooper at the deadline and just get cheaper at that position, because Amari Cooper has earned at least some sort of contract extension from the Browns, or for them to let him go and make money somewhere else. Both are great route runners. Both are sneaky quick. It's just Jerry Jeudy's never lived up to the hype and the comparison of a first-round pick the way Amari Cooper has. Now, Amari Cooper has created a reputation of disappearing in games. Sure. But Jerry Jeudy has created a reputation of just completely never showing up ever. So when you find yourself in those games where Cooper has disappeared, which you know will happen, the guy that would fill in his role is Jerry Jeudy, who has built up zero confidence in the NFL of being able to perform at a high level consistently at all. He's had a handful of good games in his career. Everything else has just been a giant disappointment. I really liked Elijah Moore when he came out. I think he's a really good slot receiver in here. I think that there's the potential he could be the leading receiver on this team come the end of the year. Now, that would require Amari Cooper to maybe not be on the team. But again, when you have the two guys ahead of Moore on the depth chart being the exact same player, somebody's going to be the square peg in the round hole on every given play if they're both out there. And if they're not, if you're trying to placate to that singular skill set, teams are going to be able to adjust to it. It's not like you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who are just these speed demons, where you can create pre-snap motions and all that, where the speed will just overcome everything, and that's really hard to adjust to, even though they're both the same. When you have these like methodical route runners, you can create a defense where you sort of expect what's happening here, and you can design a good little zone defense, play some bump coverage on the outside, and it will shut down two receivers playing the exact same way. You go with the exact same strategy of how you shut down just a pure route runner type with two guys, and it doesn't really open up the opportunities that it would otherwise for that speed demon. The only one who would really benefit is Elijah Moore. That's why I point out he could be the one who ends up being the leading receiver. Now, you look at some of the depth here. Cedric Tillman, who was drafted last year, he could be somebody who could step in and also have some success. David Bell is another one who could have some success. Jamari Threat. Like, some of these depth pieces could be very surprising in terms of their production based upon their current position on the depth chart, just because, again, of the skill set differences. I can't fathom both these guys being on the team next year. I can't fathom them finishing the season with Amari Cooper still on the roster. Unless Jerry Jeudy goes down with an injury, or he's so horrifically bad, which is a possibility, that he just falls completely out of favor on the depth chart immediately. There's just no world where these guys coexist, and that really hurts the ranking of this wide receiver room, because it cancels out all the variety that you could possibly have. And variety, unless you have like a super high-end player like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle again, unless you have those super high-end players, which Amari Cooper just isn't anymore. I think he can play in certain weeks like a top 10 wide receiver, but I think sustaining that consistently is just not in the cards the older he gets. The redundancy hurts. And then you get to the tight end room, and David Njoku, who you paid, who came off of a great year. He's my 17th ranked tight end going into this season. I think there's a lot of tight ends who have slowly and gradually surpassed him just a little bit here. You saw Jake Ferguson have a real breakout. And he's had weeks where he's produced really well, but he hasn't been that tight end outside of that 1 year. I think it was 2 years ago. It probably was, where you saw this consistency that you get out of Mark Andrews, that you get out of Dallas Goedert, that you get out of George Kittle, that you get out of Travis Kelce. He's just not that guy. As much as they wanted him to be that guy, and as much as he had that moment where people are like, oh, he figured it out, he is that guy. He's just not. He is somebody who does create mismatch issues because he's got an athleticism to him. He's got a size advantage over, smaller defensive backs. He's going to outrun linebackers. But kind of the story of this entire offense outside of Nick Chubb pre-injury is the consistency issue. You can't have a team where you got guys, your top weapons, habitually disappear in the middle of games, get small, disappear, are nowhere to be found, can't get open, can't separate. And Njoku and Amari Cooper are sort of the antithesis of that. And you got them both. And you don't have any depth behind Njoku to really make up for that. You don't have like that guy you can send out there and be like this ultimate receiver who can just be who would be a good comparison. Like somebody who's got that Evan Ingram, archetype. Or like a Darren Waller archetype where they're like such pure receivers that at least opens something up here. And you don't even really have like a true great, like traditional, like quote, sixth offensive line running tight end either. So you need David Njoku to come out and be consistent. Now, maybe Ken Dorsey brings something to the offensive scheme that helps that out, but Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, yeah, they're good talents. They had good years, but Njoku's had good years. When is the great year coming? When is the greatness going to sustain itself? When is the greatness going to be consistent? Cooper's probably aged out of that. But I genuinely fear that when this team is going to lose, it's going to be because they just cannot push the ball down the field, because they're going to have these issues with lack of separation. And I don't even know if it's lack of effort, but like the lack of mental toughness to be in a situation where you're not getting your way with every route that you're running, where you're not being targeted maybe as much as you think. Maybe a team is, blanketing you a little bit more than they did the week before, like they do with Cooper, and Cooper just gets small and disappears. This is a real genuine concern for what separates this team from being a great team, which I think they are, and being a true Super Bowl contender, which of all the teams I have in the top 10, they may be the least likely to win a Super Bowl despite not being the 10th ranked team. And maybe I can be surprised here, but if you play fantasy football out there, maybe look at Elijah Moore more so than these other three to be like this sneaky league winner for you. Now, one of the concerns they won't have is this offensive line. They've done a great job building this offensive line. To start with the pass blocking, they're tied for 8th in the league. Ethan Pocic has established himself as one of the best centers in the entire league. And if he can repeat what he did last year, he could be like in that Creed Humphrey conversation for centers. Bitonio, he's on the bit of a downturn. He's not as great as he was at his peak, but he's still a really great interior offensive lineman, especially in pass blocking. Wyatt Teller's sort of the opposite of him. You'll see him perform tremendously in run blocking, but he's also still very serviceable, very good, quality starter for pass blocking. The tackles are the real concern here because of the injury concerns. Now, both Wills and Conklin are currently on the PUP list. I would say by the beginning of the year, they're probably both going to be off of it. But Jedrick Wills has never really lived up to the hype, that first round pick hype. He's settled in as okay. You know, he's like a low end. He's been like a, more often than not, like a low end starter quality. Jack Conklin's been solid. He's been the solid right tackle. He's in that category with like a Braden Smith or like a Brian O'Neill in terms of just being really solid, really reliable. Just needs to stay healthy and stay on the field. Now, they had a tremendous breakout star in DeJuan Jones, who is maybe the best depth offensive lineman in the entire league this year. And he really shined when he had to come in to replace the injuries that they had last year. Probably should have been drafted way higher than he was. But I really like how he's settled in to being everything that his traits projected him to be. By this time next year, he's going to be a starter on this team. I think that Jedrick Wills is probably the odd man out. Unless they end up losing both, then I would say DeJuan Jones will end up playing probably right tackle if they lose both. And if they just lose Jedrick Wills, I think he just goes to left tackle. I think they're perfectly fine there. You know, Jermaine Ifedi's an interesting depth piece. Zach Zinter and Javion Cohen as interior guys are pretty good. Luke Weipler is another injury concern. I really liked him coming out of Ohio State. Doesn't look like he's going to be necessarily in a position to make it happen for Cleveland, unfortunately. I think his career sort of settled on him being a fourth interior offensive lineman at best. Especially with them bringing in Zach Zinter, that sort of puts Weipler's position and Weipler's role into real jeopardy, I would say. And same thing with bringing in Javion Cohen. It does feel like this is direct competition to Luke Weipler, and if he can't get healthy, then he can't perform, and then he's just going to continuously fall out of favor. Jermaine Ifedi's like this hybrid, you know, can play inside, outside. He's a good veteran presence to have, even though if his skill set isn't necessarily top end. He gets the run blocking. They're 15th in the league. This is where you really lose Jedrick Wills and Joel Bitonio in particular. Bitonio's just not the same. You know, he's not the same run blocker he used to be before, especially last year. I think he showed that. Jedrick Wills just never has become a great run blocker. Pretty slow off the line. In the run blocking, doesn't necessarily attack as well as you would hope he would. His hand placement kind of gets all wonky in comparison to his pass protection. Pocic is just as good as a run blocker as a pass blocker. Wyatt Teller takes that step up in run blocking. And Jack Conklin sort of hovers again around that, you know, quality starter level overall. Which is why I feel like if he can stay healthy, he'd be a smart guy to keep, and just have DeJuan Jones play left tackle long term. Now, DeJuan Jones could very well beat out Jedrick Wills this season for that role. But in run blocking, DeJuan Jones is also just not good. So you kind of run into the same issues here. I think as a pass blocker, he's much better than Jedrick Wills. Comparable run blockers. And I think that the contract in particular for Jedrick Wills and the upside for Jedrick Wills is what is sort of keeping him in that starting lineup, at least early on in this season. You know, but Zach Zinter, I think, is a tremendous... Zach Zinter, I think, is positioned right now as the fourth interior offensive lineman. Really creating opportunities for them to develop, and I think that he's somebody who long term is probably going to be the Bitonio replacement. So I would look for that. I think between DeJuan Jones and Zach Zinter, they've sort of created a smooth transition. Like you see the Eagles do this a lot, where they will draft and they'll get guys ahead. They'll put guys in the system, like on the offense and defensive line in particular, with the designation that, you know, not going to start year one unless they necessarily have to. Probably aren't going to start year two unless they necessarily have to. It's year 3, year 4, when they've got that experience under their belt, they got the coaching up under their belt, and they can be a nice, smooth transition. And I think DeJuan Jones, you still want to develop him as a run blocker. His giant frame should be more of an asset, but sometimes you get into that situations where you could just be too big and you lose leverage a lot. You don't have the get off that you need to be an effective run blocker. And I think DeJuan Jones, that's what he really needs to work on. Again, Luke Weipler, this is where he's pretty good, but I just don't know if the opportunities are going to be there for him with the type of drafting that they've done and the type of free agency pickups that they've been doing. But overall, you can see where this really helps out the floor of this offense, especially with the pass blocking. It's going to give Deshaun Watson some time. So maybe this is going to help him get back again to what I talked about with him, is that Houston Texans Deshaun Watson, where he's comfortable, he's patient, he's able to process the defense. He's going to have the time to do that if this line can stay healthy. Even if Jedrick Wills comes out, DeJuan Jones goes in, you might actually get better at pass blocking. Overall, I think DeJuan Jones overall is a better player. But it's just not in the cards right now. Still really quality group. And I think that's going to help the overall production of the pass offense in particular, which is going to give opportunities to that weapons group that I have very little faith in the grand scheme of the long term of the season. So maybe that does help them out as well. Overall, this is my tied for 15th offense. So they're right smack dab in the middle of the league. 18th in pass offense, tied for 13th in run offense. Just a straight up middle of the pack offense that does have the upside to be better than this. It does have the upside to be better than this, but unfortunately, it does have a downside aspect too, where it could be worse than this. So finding that balance in there for this offense is going to be a real important characteristic of this season. Now let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. We'll start with the edge room, and I want you to pay attention real quick. These are two different graphics. Yes, they are the best edge room in both aspects for me. It's just a great group. Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith are the best 1-2 punch in football right now. Myles Garrett coming off that Defensive Player of the Year season, I think he's in perfect position to repeat it. And then you got Zadarius Smith, who is a tremendous number 2 now. There is the concern of how he wants to play on early downs as less of a true pass rusher and more of like a edge setting against the run. He's still really good at that. He's still like a quality starter at that, but there is the concerns about effort. That's why he only played, I think, 60% of the snaps for Cleveland last year when he was of healthy snaps, 60% of healthy snaps. Has injury concerns that come up week to week. He's almost always somebody you'll see as listed as questionable almost every week on the injury report. I think that puts Okoronkwo in position where he's going to see a lot of the early down work, and then you'll just see Zadarius Smith come in true passing situations. Myles Garrett's going to get a lot of snaps. They do need to find somebody though to play on early downs for Myles Garrett, even though he's one of the best run defending defensive ends in the entire league. They do need to find the way to get him off the field where they don't lose such high quality. And outside of Okoronkwo, they don't really have that guy. So that's something that they need to perhaps look into. Maybe you get more of an undersized interior guy to play on the outside sometimes, the way you see Chris Jones do it in Kansas City. Maybe that's something they can look into. But when Jim Schwartz is such a quality defensive coordinator, the best in the entire league, he's going to figure out ways to mix and match these guys to make sure Myles Garrett is at his optimal performances late in games, and that Zadarius Smith isn't around, grabbing his shoulder because it's first down or it's 2nd and 2 and he wants to come off the field. He's also somebody that you could put anywhere across the defensive line. You saw him particularly in Green Bay. He played a lot of 3 and 1 tech on passing downs because he has this weird combination of speed and power that he can get around some of these interior offensive linemen, and it does create opportunities where you could have Myles Garrett, Za'Darius Smith, and then any combination of Okoronkwo, Alex Wright, or Isaiah McGuire on the field at the same time. And you're just going to continuously boost up and optimize the different types of pass rushes that you can put, the different types of formation packages you can put together, and it really does give Jim Schwartz a lot to work with here. It gives him a real opportunity to be super creative in any given situation, which does help the players because you see the coach getting excited, you see all these different things coming up, and these players are going to want these really unique packages to work. So they're going to, that enthusiasm that frankly you don't see a lot in professional athletes anymore because they're getting paid so much. A lot of it's about the money. To give them that, like, okay, we're going to have like this schoolyard formation where it's going to be Garrett, Smith, Okoronkwo, and Alex Wright all on the field at the same time. And we're going to have Myles Garrett playing 3 tech. We're going to have Za'Darius Smith playing like a 9, and the offensive coordinator and the quarterback are going to be losing their minds trying to identify where everybody is and trying to figure out where to shift to and everything. And it's going to be a disaster, and boom, sack. All those things are going to come up in the film room with Jim Schwartz, and I think that's going to be a true asset. Again, they do need to sign somebody to be an early down edge for them, because when you get to the interior group here, they start out tied for 15th in interior rush, but with all the world of depth. Yes, they do lack like a true high upside player, but Maurice Hurst, Shelby Harris, Quentin Jefferson, Dalvin Tomlinson, who's on the PUP list, another guy on the PUP list. Between those 4 guys, man, what a healthy rotation to have, where you, when you look at the ratings you have, you're not losing a whole lot when you're rotating them in and out. And to have that, a lot of pockets are going to be collapsing, and that's only going to help out your defensive ends perform at an even higher level. You got Michael Hall here, who, for all intents and purposes, could have been that early down, bigger defensive end. But apparently he has an issue with keeping his hands to himself. And we'll leave it at that. He's still listed on the roster. Depending on how that legal situation works out, he would be very likely cut, which is a real shame, because I believe the plan when they brought him in was to slowly integrate him situationally and have him be a part of this tremendous depth that they have with this interior group. You even get to them against the run. Now they do take a step back in their depth, but the high-end guys, Maurice Hurst, tremendous against the run. Shelby Harris, really good against the run as well. Really good number 2. They do lose the depth. You know, Dalvin Tomlinson will need to come back, because with Tomlinson out and Michael Hall likely out, you're left with Siaki Ika, Jaden Peavy, and Quentin Jefferson. Not exactly super stud run stuffers. Now, Siaki Ika can come in and you just be a giant space eater. You know, play that one gap, eat up 2 blocks, and then let Maurice Hurst sort of do his work with his athleticism. You know, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because you're so high quality across this entire defensive line with your top end guys that you may just need somebody to eat up space that Shelby Harris just wouldn't be able to do because he doesn't have the size. So maybe that does boost Siaki Ika and sort of artificially enhance his abilities that he just didn't show last year. That could be a thing. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if he was on the field as your worst defensive lineman, because again of how high quality he is. You got an 85 in Maurice Hurst, an 88 in Garrett, an 82 in Za'Darius Smith, 73 here in Shelby Harris. Shelby Harris is somebody who I think you could look to also be this early down, bigger defensive end as part of the rotation. But I think in turn, that's when you have Siaki Ika, and you want to get maybe a little bit bigger. You have Hurst, Ika, Harris, and then Okoronkwo or Myles Garrett playing the other defensive end position. I think that would be an interesting front 4 that they could institute here. But you look at them against the run, they got the best edge group, tied for 8th here in run stuffers. This could very well be the best overall defensive line in the entire league. Especially then when you mix in tied for 15th on interior rush with all that depth. With all that depth, plus what you get from your defensive ends. In terms of just overall depth, never mind the quality of the players, they may have, I think they undoubtedly have the best front four pass rush in the entire league, just based upon that alone. And that's going to really drive the quality of this defense and the performances, and again, help out this offense. Let's move on to the linebackers now, and they are tied for 11th in linebacker coverage with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and Jordan Hicks as their top two linebackers for me here. They brought in Devin Bush. I don't see it. I think he kind of had like maybe 1.5 good years in Pittsburgh and just never became the top 10 pick that Pittsburgh made him that year coming out of Michigan, which is a real shame as a Michigan guy. But Jordan Hicks has been like this really consistent veteran player in the league. You're sort of expected him to fall off, leaving Philly for Minnesota and then going to Arizona. It's like, okay, Jordan Hicks is going to fall off. He's going to fall off. He's going to fall off. Now, he's not the top level linebacker that he used to be when he was in Philadelphia. But as a number two, he is a quality number two linebacker, especially you get him here in these pass coverage situations. It's a great spot for him to be in. JOK, always been a little undersized, but has expressed great ability adjusting to the true linebacker position at the next level. Even when you get to them against the run, Jordan Hicks, they are tied for 22nd. Jordan Hicks is going to be somebody who might end up being the green dot linebacker, because JOK, I think, would come off the field for Mohamed Diabate in these situations as well if they want to run like a two linebacker set on early downs. But Jordan Hicks' age also could play a factor in that, but having Diabate there, if you want to run a more traditional 4-3 front, you have a decent little 3 linebacker group there. If you only want to run 2 linebackers, you have a good substitution in Diabate, at least for against the run. Not so much against the pass. They don't really have a depth player in that situation. Maybe going out and looking for one could be part of that. You want to look for maybe a defensive end against the run for some depth, and then a linebacker to work in pass coverage for some depth as well. But I really like JOK. He's in a prime position, I think, just because of the quality of the front four, to have that true breakout season, like get to that next level of linebacker in the league, get to that top level, top 10 linebacker position that he's currently just short of. I would say if you ranked him anywhere between 20th and 15th best linebacker in the league, that would be a fair ranking for him overall. I think that with another year of Jim Schwartz, another year of a great front four, with all that depth that they have, he's just not going to be the focus of a quarterback pre-snap. He's not going to be necessarily the focus of an offensive coordinator in preparation leading up to that game with all the other talent they have around him. So he sort of gets to play behind the scenes here, and that is really going to open up opportunities for him because he is a great athlete. He could very well, he's like an undersized linebacker, oversized safety, so he can play a different number of positions out there, put him in different number of matchups depending on what your opponent is and what their roster looks like and how they design their offenses. And you could be a sneaky, even though it's basically an edge rusher award, he's like a sneaky breakout player of the year candidate, at least. Not so much a defensive player of the year candidate, because again, that's an edge rusher award at this point. But man, I would really want to highlight him, if I'm a Browns fan, to be that guy who elevates this defense to yet another level with his growth and performance. Moving on to the corners now, and I might be I'm lower on the cornerback room as a whole than most people are. Most people have this cornerback room as top 5 in the league. Now, I think the potential of it is great. I think they can play like a top 5 group. But I think they can play like a top 5 group because of how quality the front four is. Again, They're working with probably the best front four in the league. So here on the back end, quarterbacks are going to have to be quick with the ball. It allows them to play a lot more instinctually. It allows them to play maybe some more tight coverage on the outside. And I do like Greg Newsome to continue to develop. I do think, that I said in talking about Jim Schwartz, how he helps elevate Newsome and Emerson in particular really is going to determine the future of Denzel Ward, because there has been this feel the last year or two that Denzel Ward has sort of lost his spot as like a top 5, top 8 cornerback in the league, and that maybe they need to move on from him because of, contract and the money stuff. Maybe this is like the second wind for Denzel Ward. He can get back to that level and they can justify it. Maybe they feel like they're underpaying him at that point, but they've also invested so much in this cornerback room. Even, Miles Harden's another rookie they brought in. They have Justin Hardy, who's basically a special teams guy. Khalif Haliassi, who I think is coming over from Kansas City. He's worked his way into being like a fourth corner almost on this team. So maybe they might be shifting a little bit away from a Denzel Ward. Even though Denzel Ward comes in with that 87 grade, I still think he's a really good number one. There's just concern about his place on this team. Maybe I'm just giving a little too much ownage to the rumor mills. Maybe I'm just looking too deeply into the day 1, day 2 investments they've made into this defensive back room in particular. Maybe I am looking a little too much into that, but I know I'm not the only one in that event who would be looking too much into it. I know that seems to be a concern across the board. Denzel Ward's long-term future. Him and Amari Cooper seem to fall into that same category with this team. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with Deshaun Watson's contract. That high-level investment is kind of sort of screwing up who they can pay otherwise. Myles Garrett is going to be, at some point, soon, very soon, probably making $40 million a year. I don't think that's too far out of the question. So there's just not enough money to go around here. And with an aging corner and aging wide receiver, that's really a thing. But I still think Denzel Ward can go to a team. Even on this team, he's still going to elevate this group, obviously. Because Greg Newsome, to me, is not ready to be a number one corner. How Jim Schwartz develops him this year, if he does start looking like a number one corner, then I do think Denzel Ward is gone. If he doesn't, that also puts Denzel Ward in a position where he's got some leverage here. You go to the safety group. They're 15th here in safety coverage. Grant Delpit, Juan Thornhill. Delpit's starting to come along, man. He's starting to look like the guy who had all that hype coming out of LSU, where the draft community had him as like a top 10 pick for a while there. Sort of fell out of favor, but he's getting back. He's starting to show that he's that guy. Juan Thornhill is a great compliment to him there on the back end. Again, you're looking for depth pieces here. Rodney McLeod just fell off a cliff, and I think he's going to continue to fall off a cliff, unfortunately. Age caught up with him. Ronnie Hickman is sort of like this low ceiling, high floor type depth piece, who I think can continue his development and I think become a reasonable third option at safety long term for this team. You get into DB against the run, they are 29th. They do lose a lot there on the back end. Now they have such good quality in that front four, and then the linebackers are going to get opportunities, that this may not be a factor all that much at all for this defense. But again, you do want to be better at this. You want Delpit and Thornhill in particular to get their hands dirty a little bit more in run support. Not the worst. There are starters in this league that are worse than them, but I think just, again, not the highest ceiling for DB run support here. I do think that this safety coverage, I think this is where the ceiling gets a lot higher. Again, especially with how good that pass rush is going to be. It's going to give these guys opportunities to jump deep routes, to be a little bit more instinctual, to commit maybe a little bit earlier in a play to open up more opportunities for themselves. I think you can say the same thing about these cornerbacks. Denzel Ward's going to be following around the number one receiver, so Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson are going to need to step up. They're going to need to be the ones to make plays and create turnovers because the balls are going to be thrown their way more often than it's going to be thrown Denzel Ward's way, I think, by a large margin. Teams are going to identify where Myles Garrett is. They're going to identify which side of the field Denzel Ward's on, and then they're going to try to exploit everywhere else. So overall, this is my 7th ranked defense in the league. The 5th ranked pass defense with tremendous potential to even be number 1 by the end of the year. And a tied for 10th run defense. It's the upside of this group is just so above and beyond what you would expect. And it happened so quickly. They did such a great job building this roster on the defensive side of the ball, committing to prospects, and getting a defensive coach in there that elevates everybody. So they are the 7th ranked team in this series. They have the 6th best coaching staff, 7th best defense, tied for 15th in offense. That's the only issue. That's the only issue. Now, and again, the offense is so volatile that I think it will drive the overall success of this team. More so, this is the most volatile ranking because of the offense and how volatile that quality of what they can be week to week is. And there you have it, my number 7 team in my 2024 NFL Deep Dive series, the Cleveland Browns. Are they even going to be this good? Are they going to be significantly worse than this? You guys tell me. It's going to be an interesting team to watch. I think they'll be a fun team to watch. And leave a comment in the comment section below about all those questions I just asked. Leave a thumbs up because you've made it this far and helps with the algorithm. Subscribe so you don't miss any of the other videos. And if you have missed any of the other videos, would you look at that? They're on the other side of my head. And check out my cool new logo there. You can subscribe, and I will see you guys with the next video next time.